في كثير من الأحيان لا يكون تاريخ الفن والنظريات التي نتعامل معها نظرياً ذات صلة بتاريخنا، ويمكن أن تؤثر على كيفية مشاركتنا في الحوار الفني. إذن كيف يمكننا التغلب على هذا المنظور والتوصل إلى مناظير مختلفة؟ ستنضم إلينا الدكتورة مها السنان عضوة في مجلس الشورى، والدكتورة ندى شبوط منسقة مبادرة الدراسات الثقافية العربية والإسلامية المعاصرة في جامعة شمال تكساس، في حلقة نقاش حول تحدي سرد تاريخ الفن من المنظور الغربي. يديرها الدكتور والمؤرخ رضا مومني. Enjoy the talk.
السلام عليكم. I'm delighted to be here. First, before starting, I would like to thank everyone for the organization of this event. The Biennale, as you probably saw, is such a beautiful and historical moment, and we are delighted to be here, invited by the organization of the Biennale, and so delighted to be reunited maybe after these 2 years of COVID and meet such lovely and familiar faces. So marhaban bikum. It's very, very nice to see all of you. We are talking about a challenging topic that we are trying to understand, shape, and also try to in a certain way to fight every single day through the work of absolutely magnificent scholars and cultural actors of the art history field. We have with us tonight Dr. Maha Al-Senan, who's art historian working mainly on the Arabian Peninsula and on the art history from the Islamic times to the modern and more contemporary. Dr. Maha is member of the parliament, and we are delighted to have her tonight. And we have Dr. Professor Regent Ridha Shabout, who's teaching at North Texas University, one of the most important and art historian on this field, who worked on the Iraqi modern art, but also and mainly now recognized as the main professor on Arab art history. They are here to share their experience about this topic and also their view on how changing the canons of art history shaped mainly in the 19th, 20th century in colonial time in general. I forgot to start by saying my name is Ridha Moumni. We will have a discussion. I will ask you some questions maybe for 25, 30 minutes, maybe a little bit more. And then we would like this discussion to be open to with the public. I will gently ask you when we will give you the mic really to ask short questions to let maybe everyone speak and ask their own questions. No statements, please, but we will be happy to answer to everything that you have, and I hope we will have a beautiful round. I should add one last thing. Dr. Maha decided to speak in Arabic, and I think we are very happy. I think you have all my headphones for the translation. So we are in Saudi, and we are most than welcome in Saudi. So Dr. Maha will speak in Arabic. I think Nada is not speaking in Iraqi because she's teaching in English in the US University, and I am absolutely not speaking also in Tunisian tonight. We will have a share fair. بس مرحبا بكم. First, and I will start with a question to both of you, but I will start with Dr. Maha. We are speaking about canons of art history. And I would like you to share first your view and also your experience of understanding of art history and also teaching art history here in Saudi.
Okay. So thank you very much. And yes, I'll be speaking in Arabic. شكرا جزيلا، وأنا سعيدة إنه بالحضور طبعا اللي تعنوا لسماع مننا، وأنا أيضا أشكر المنظمين على تسجيل كل هذه الجلسات وجعلها متاحة لاحقا لمن أراد العودة لها. نرجع لموضوع مفهومنا عن تاريخ الفن. كلنا نعرف أنه تاريخ الفن انكتب من قبل الأوروبيين في القرن ال19 لما كانت أوروبا تعيش العصر الذهبي، لما كانت هي قوة سياسية، فانكتب بفكر مناطقي معين يعتمد على خلينا نقول السياسة المهيمنة في ذلك الوقت. فكانت ترى أنها هي العالم والآخر هو الآخر، وإحنا كنا في ذلك الوقت الآخر الذي لم يكتب في سياق تاريخ الفن كما يجب أو كما نراه اليوم. من المهم جدا أن احنا كباحثين كمؤرخين كمتابعين أنه ما ننتظر أنه الآخر يضعنا في السياق، وإنما نقوم بأنفسنا بعمل ذلك. فأعتقد اليوم عندنا عبء كبير في السعودية، في الدول العربية، الدول الإسلامية، وكل الدول اللي كانت خارج نطاق أوروبا، أنها تعيد كتابة تاريخ الفن وفق سياق عالمي وليس سياق محدود ضمن مرحلة وفترة وجغرافية معينة.
دكتور ندى.
Welcome everyone. It's good to see everyone. Totally agree with what Dr. Maha said in terms of that art history, as we understand it as a concept, is a 19th century construct from Europe. Now, regardless of the politics of the self and the other, also there was colonialism and the relationship between imperialism and modernity, or modernism. And this is where the biggest problem is. Because when everything, all these isms, starting from the ancient to the medieval through the different periods of art history were canonized, it was very much from a modern perspective, looking back and reinterpreting the past in the specific modern colonial vision that saw the other as less, as decorative, as minor, and the other is not only the Muslim world and the Arab world and Latin America and China and pretty much the rest of the world that was not the dominant powers of Western Europe. Now, the other problem is that today and since there has been this concept, this understanding that art history is not practiced or not understood by the Arabs in the Arab world or the Muslim world. Was 7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, there was a book that was published by James Elkins titled, "Is Art History Global?" It asked that question, and there was a seminar and a lot of discussions, and it was not a resolved issue. Is art history global or not? I mean, we hear about art as a global language, but we all understand, of course, that it is only global in its particularities, that it is not that we all speak the same language, but we all understand the vocabulary and we speak specific language. Same will go with art history. As a matter of fact, as one of the efforts that I am undertaking with a group of colleagues is mapping art histories in the Arab world, Iran and Turkey, because of the association. And so first thing we need to understand is, what does art history mean to you? What does art history mean in the region, in the other countries, so we can have a conversation based on a common language, even if we don't think art history is the same. When the Getty Foundation, it's a project that is funded by the Getty Foundation, when they came to me, they approached me, they have a program called Connecting Art Histories. They said, how can we connect with art histories or things that look like art history, understanding that it may not be the same in the Arab world? And as an art historian who works on the Arab world, who of course originally I am from the Arab world, but I've lived the majority of my life in the Western Europe and in the US, and I think in English and I write in English, I share in that problematic and the responsibility of needing to understand what does art history mean in the Arab world. And so, convinced the Getty Foundation that first thing we should do is we should have this conversation and collect the data of, you have universities that teach art here. You have courses of art history. I have a former student who is sitting here teaching at a university here, and we've had that conversation about what is art history. So I think, it's very important that everyone in the so-called other part of the world participate in coining an understanding, if not a definition, it does not have to be a definition, can be an open-ended dialectic, understanding of what art history is.
Thank you very much. I would like to raise the point here just to understand about the notion of shaping and understanding today what is art history, and more specifically about the role of institutions, because you were speaking about the Getty, but there are so many institutions today in the United States, in Europe, that also expanding this notion of art history. And in a certain way, we don't see it too much in our region, in the Arab world. Lately, we were taking, for instance, this example of displaying Arab artists, and we were speaking about Ibrahim Salahi's exhibition at the Tate Modern. The project started in Sharjah, went to Doha, and then went at the Tate. Everyone remembers the exhibition at the Tate, and no one recalls the origin of the project. You are speaking about a project that came from the Getty. We can speak about the MoMA also, with this beautiful book that you edited now 3 years ago or 4 years ago. What is the role, I want to ask you about, what is the role of Western institutions also to influence on shaping or maybe shaping a notion of art history? And on the other hand, I would like also, after, ask Dr. Maha, how do you see this power dynamic between institutions of the West and institutions here in Saudi, especially after being to this Biennale and visiting the Biennale, and how do you see this power dynamic, maybe not changing, because I think it will be very hard to change, but how create a new balance and try to decenter a little bit this debate?
You know, decentering, this is a main concept and a very important concept. In the slide you see here is the Association Modern Contemporary Art from the Arab World, Iran and Turkey, that I founded in 2007 based on a necessity. As a student of Arab origin studying art history in the United States, I was faced with the challenges of no resources, there are no books to read, no one knew what I'm talking about. I mean, I did my graduate work in the 1990s. When I said modern Arab art, that was a non-entity. No one really understood what I'm talking about. So this association was necessary because we were having students who are studying Arab art. Now, it is unfortunate, and I remember we had a conference, our first conference in 2010 at the opening of Mathaf in Doha, and someone stood up and said, why is this conference on Arab art in Doha, you know, is in English, not in Arabic? And the reality is, AMCA is an association that is US-based and registered in the US, and while everyone who is a scholar of the Arab world knows Arabic, they're not very comfortable speaking it or writing in Arabic. This is a topic that we were talking about before, including me. I've lived now the majority of my life in English speaking. I think in English, I dream in English, and so I write in English. I need to develop, and of course it's my problem, I need to develop a better sense of writing in Arabic, because it is not, you know, the same. But we'll talk about the issue of translation later. Now, having these institutions in the US, and they're in the US because we're in the US, and we're in academia, and there are funds, there is money, we are able to do things in the US, but we are also the scholars of the other, right? We study the art of different places, and many of our members are second-generation Arabs living in the United States who are able to, you know, decolonize and decenter from within. And I think that's very important. We teach Arab art in institutions now. We use the art is showing up, as Ridha said, in the Tate. True, they still don't remember that it was in Sharjah and Doha before. Even the Louvre Abu Dhabi in the modern section, the only artists who showed up seemed to be artists who were exhibited in the Tate or in other Western institutions. So, you know, of course, we're still in a world where it is dominated by the Western rhetoric, so we're, you know, nowhere there. But actually, I think it's an important role that we inside of the US play, because we're able to subvert the canon from within and rewrite, you know, revise, rewrite, redefine things from within. One thing we do lack, as much as we try, is to have that conversation from the, you know, outside and inside.
So, أنا برجع لموضوع المؤسسات من ناحيتين، أو خلينا نقول من ناحية واحدة اللي هي اقتصادية، لكن لما نفسر الدور الاقتصادي راح أفسره من منحيين. الأول إنه ما حد يقدر ينكر إنه عظمة الأمم، عظمة منتجها الثقافي، ومن العمل الفني أو المنتج الفني مرتبط بشكل كبير باقتصادها. القوى الاقتصادية هي اللي تهيمن بثقافتها، وهذا اللي خلق لنا ما يسمى بالاستعمار والاستشراق لاحقا. كان هيمنة اقتصادية في وقت محدد، واليوم الهيمنة الاقتصادية لم تعد أوروبا ولم تعد أمريكا، أصبحت الصين، أصبحت آسيا، أصبحت دول الخليج وغيرها. فالحراك الاقتصادي اللي قاعد يصير في العالم اليوم حتما بيغير أشياء كثيرة. نرجع للمؤسسات. صحيح أن معظم المؤسسات الثقافية مؤسسات غير ربحية، لكن لا تستطيع أن تنمو أو تعمل بدون دعم اقتصادي. لما نرجع اليوم ونقول أنه على سبيل المثال في آسيا من قبل طبعا دول الخليج، لكن في 10 أو 20 سنة الأخيرة دول الخليج بدأت تنهض في دعم المؤسسات الثقافية، بدأ يتغير الاتجاه. يعني العالم التفت لآسيا لما الآسيويين دعموا المؤسسات الثقافية المحلية. العالم اليوم يدعم أو يلتفت للخليج. كلنا اليوم هنا لما المملكة العربية السعودية دعمت المؤسسات، أنشأت مؤسسة زي مؤسسة ثنائيات الدرعية. في الخليج المتاحف سواء في الدوحة ولا في أبو ظبي، المؤسسات الثقافية في دبي، في الشارقة وغيرها. لولا هذا الدعم الاقتصادي للمؤسسات لما التفت الآخر لها. فيعني ما نقدر احنا نغض الطرف عن موضوع الأثر الاقتصادي، لكن صحيح أتفق مع الدكتورة ندى في أنه الغرب أيضا اتجه للشرق، حتى للمؤسسات اللي تعتني بدراسات الشرق الأدنى أو الشرق الأوسط اعتنت أو التفتت له لتدرسه. يعني زي ما ندرس قطع الآثار لكن لا لتدعمه. في فرق بين الدراسة والدعم، وطبيعي إنه إحنا ما نتوقع الدعم. حتى اليوم إذا إحنا نبغى حضور للعمل الفني الخليجي أو السعودي في المؤسسات العالمية، معناه أنه لازم يكون في دعم من رجال الأعمال، من القطاع الحكومي في دول الخليج لتلك المؤسسات، عشان نرى العمل الفني أو الثقافة السعودية أو الخليجية في تلك المؤسسات.
If I may add something here, because it's very important what Dr. Maha just said in terms of studying versus supporting. So yes, the so-called West studied, and this is Orientalism, right? So they studied the Muslim world, they studied the Arab world, and they coined certain understandings of what that is. That's what we call Orientalism. Something we have to continue to combat, because the problem is it set certain aspects that are now standards. So now this is difficult to sort of change. But to be fair, also institutions like AMCA or the Getty that is trying to change, it's a not-for-profit and it's trying to change, they are, I mean, we can't think of them as Western institutions because they do genuinely want to change. AMCA is based in the US. However, you know, I mean, it is as global and as hyphenated in its identity as anything else because its membership is from everywhere. And we try to, you know, sort of support the Arabic speakers' scholarship as well. One thing we need, despite the development, the latest development that are financial in their basis, as Dr. Maha said, in Dual al-Khalij, and even now, is to remember that while we need to support our artists, we actually really need to foster scholarship, because we need to not only have the basic text about the artist and their product, we need to contextualize it. We need to historicize it. We need to be writing our own narratives of art history and not depend on the translation of art history that we get from the West. Now we are trying, us who teach there, we're trying to do that as well. I am an American, but I'm also an Iraqi. I am also, you know, many things. So I can't, you know, limit my identity in one thing. But still, this is not happening here.
I think Dr. Maha wants to say something, but I will say just something very quickly. You are Iraqi. You are like when you speak with Dr. Neda, when you have a coffee with her, she's Iraqi, but she speaks in American. Dr. Maha, sorry.
أنا أبغى أعقب على نفس هذه النقطة تحديداً، لأنه لما نتكلم يعني أنا أتفهم جداً أن المؤسسات الثقافية وخصوصاً في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية تهتم بكل الثقافات، لأن اليوم احنا إذا بنعرف أمريكا مو زي تعريفهم السابق أنها عبارة عن مهاجرين أوروبيين. اليوم عدد المهاجرين من مختلف بقاع الدنيا هم اللي يشكلون النسيج الأمريكي. فإذا تغافلوا العرب، إذا تغافلوا المكسيكيين، إذا تغافلوا الصينيين، إذا تغافلوا كل هذه الثقافات، معناها بتكون مشكلة حقيقية في تعريف الثقافة الأمريكية.
Yeah, but it's a problem. As we know, we had a president for 4 years who denied that. So, you know, that's the politics. But the politics is very important because this is where the grants come. And I tell you, I'll give you an example. Using the politics of the time, because, you know, 9/11 and then the invasion of Iraq, that meant there was federal money that went for languages, to teach Arabic, to teach Farsi, Pashto, and to support studies. We took full advantage of that, the scholars who work with that. Great, let's use that federal money and make something with it. So politics is very connected to the financial as well. But I don't want us to think that when we're talking about these institutions that we're talking about necessarily a governmental sort of sponsorship. No, there is a challenge, or there's a war and a struggle between the institutions that are trying to, including institutions like MoMA and the Tate, because MoMA and the Tate are a big structure and they have their own strategies, but they also have different individuals who work within that system who try to do something different. But there are always, barriers.
I'm showing a slide of the book that Dr. Neda edited with Annika Linson and Sarah Rogers at the MoMA on modern Arab art. But we agree about this question of funding scholars, especially us, I guess, but funding scholars and research. But one of the questions, I mean, we were mentioning the notion of other, and the others is very related to the notion of colonialism, having subaltern societies, white society describing the other. And this is the birth of the notion of Islamic art. How many words, how many terms, how many topics were developed before finding one word, Islamic art, defining this very big and huge region of the world. I want to ask you the question about the approach, how to fight this approach, not to put all the Arab people, but I would say not only Arab people, but almost the global South. Dr. Maha was mentioning Mexico, China. I mean, the Biennale is very refreshing to see a little bit this collaboration of artists of the global South being displayed here. But for instance, when you study modernism, we have this question of alternative modernism, which is maybe a very wrong word to use for modernism, but also we know that today museums such as the Art Institute in Chicago, the MoMA, the Met now also displaying Egyptian artists, Syrian artists, Iraqi artists, but what do they represent? Because sometimes we go to these very big museums, you have a room with 20 paintings, another room with 20 paintings of European American artists, and suddenly we have one painting coming from this region. How is it possible to change this mindset, to show that modernism is the modernism in the word, and there is a different meaning and different expression of the modernism, and not alternative modernism in the way that there is the West and the rest of the world. And also I would like to hear from both of you the importance of publications, and also the information given to curators in the West, but also here in this region of the world.
Dr. Maha, you should start, because I think it's really important to think about, to hear what you think, the position coming from here.
أول شيء دائما نلاحظ الحكي إنه المؤسسات الغربية ما فيها أعمال من المنطقة العربية، وهي تعرف نفسها على أنها مؤسسات عالمية. طيب إحنا عندنا مؤسسات محلية وكثير منها ما تمثل أو ما فيها هذا التنوع في النسيج لفنانين غربيين، فيه تركيز على الفنانين السعوديين، أو حتى في القاعات الربحية نلقى أنه البيع غالباً لفنانين سعوديين، فنانين عرب من مصر، من سوريا، من العراق أو غيره. فلهذيك اسمها مؤسسات دولية ولا منصات دولية، وهذه منصات محلية. فإحنا لازم نغير طريقة تفكيرنا للتعريف بهذه المنصات ومدى دوليتها إذا صح لي التعبير. هذه من ناحية. من ناحية ثانية إحنا عندنا أعتقد مشكلة قاعدة يعني تحل، اللي هي مشكلة خلينا نقول الموانع أو الحدود أو التقاطع والانسجام، وأنا أعتقد أنه قاعد يحل، لأنه الترجمة فقط ما كانت حلها. المفروض أن احنا نفهم الآخر. أنا بجيب مثال مرة بسيط ويمكن في نهاية الأمر هو منتج فني. وجود منصات زي نتفليكس لما بدأت تخرج عن هوليوود وتشتغل على محتوى لأفلام تنتج محلياً، وبعدين في خيارات الدبلجة لأي لغة، الناس بدأت تعي الآخر من خلال الصورة المتحركة، من خلال الأفلام. فمعناه أنه التقنية قاعدة تساعدنا عشان نندمج أكثر. بكرة راح نندمج حتى في موضوع الفنون البصرية، وخصوصا أن أساسا الفنون البصرية تحولت من العمل الفني ذو البعدين إلى عمل أبعاد متعددة ومتحرك وتقني، وأعتقد الكل يفهمه. واليوم البينالي أكبر مثال. وعلى فكرة إذا سمحتوا لي فقط شيء في البينالي مقارنة بالفعاليات الإقليمية، إنه أعمال الفنانين السعوديين لما تدخل وتشوفها، وأنا أتكلم هنا بشغف سعودي بحت، إنه العمل الفني السعودي قوي جدا ومنافس، وما تقدر تقول والله إنه مدعوم من الحكومة عشان يظهر في محفل عالمي. لا، بالعكس، وجوده قوي جدا وظهوره يمثل فعلا مستوى العمل أو المنتج الفني السعودي.
Very much agree. Now, Ridha, you asked a question specifically about, and I'll speak as an academic who teaches in the US, and we have courses like Art Appreciation and Survey Arts, where we teach the art of the world, starting from the ancient. And so, you know, the ancient, the Egyptian, then the medieval, and then they added a chapter called Islamic art, where for the majority of my students, it feels like Islamic art happened on the moon, not, you know, among the world in other places, because it's so segregated. But it's 13 centuries of development that were happening cross. So one way, for example, now the way we teach Islamic art is integrated. You know, MoMA did one good thing. You know, all the museums have works of art from the region. When Trump issued the ban, what became known as the Muslim ban, one of the things that MoMA did in reaction is they pulled out works from their storage that were from artists from the banned, 7 banned Muslim countries, and exhibited them. They did the right way of exhibiting them in the halls with everything else. So, for example, a small work called Mosque by Ibrahim Salahi, the Sudanese artist that we were just mentioning, that was purchased in 1962 by Alfred Barr, who was, you know, MoMA is known with Alfred Barr, who really very much tried to politicize modernism. He bought that work from Ibrahim Salahi. A beautiful work, Ibrahim Salahi, who was visiting the US and was brought by the Harman Foundation in collaboration with the Ford. Harman Foundation was trying to promote African-American black artists to exhibit, because at the time, they were not exhibiting in the museums. He created that work of art with the Spiral Group, this group of African-American. Ibrahim Salahi is from Sudan. He's African too. And so Alfred Barr bought that work. That work was exhibited in the new acquisitions, because that's the policy of MoMA, and then disappeared. It was in storage until MoMA pulled it out because of the ban. What is interesting, though, is that they put it on the wall facing Picasso's Demoiselles d'Avignon, which is, I mean, that's the right place for it. So they did this right job. I mean, you know, we congratulated them and we thanked them, but the reality is, well, why were these works in the storage for so long and no one saw them? You know, I mean, then now you take them out. Now, Also, all of these institutions now have acquisition committees that are buying work from the Arab world and from the region. But that's a financial situation. That's where the money is. Art always follows the money. And so they're following the money. The auction houses in the Gulf, the initiatives that were taking place in the Gulf, and now here, are very helpful. Best thing to do in museums in the US or in Europe is to have board members who are from the region. Put in the money, buy the works of art, force the knowledge to happen. Academia follows or initiates different dialogue. Now, it's true that the terrain is changing, but these are foundational ways of looking at things that are not changing easily. We, for the last 20 years, have been talking about globalizing modernism. That modernism is not a European phenomenon or a European development. Even if we want to talk about Paris in the 1920s, Paris in the 1920s was hardly French. I mean, it's, you know, Picasso's not French. Picasso is a Spaniard. He's a Mediterranean. There, you know, were people like Ibrahim Salahi studying at the Slade in London and Jawad Salim from Iraq and artists from everywhere. It was truly global. Why do we then think of modernism as a European phenomenon? Why do we need to talk about alternative modernisms, not one modernism that is understood in different parts of the world in different ways, because it engages with the local in ways of production. The same way we're thinking about the global contemporary. You know, our artists here are as global as the artists are in anywhere else in the world. And they, you know, the problem with the modern art from the Arab world is that it is tied to its identity. It is expected to look Arab, whatever that is. So that creates the problem.
Dr. Nada, maybe quickly, you and Dr. Maha about this topic before we give the mic to the attendees. I want to ask you specifically the question about writing art history of the region, because you were mentioning Picasso. If we number, I don't know, the publications, monographs, biographies, books, artistic productions also on Picasso, I don't know how many.
Thousands and thousands.
And thousands. And yes. Sometimes when we are looking even to major figures of Arab art history, we don't have any documentation, or we have to look in the past. And I think this is also reflective of the lack of writing history maybe in the regions, and also linked probably also to different political dynamics in the region. Mm-hmm. So I just want to ask you about this. How do you envision that? How to create maybe in the US, but also in the Arab world, a strongest, I don't know, pillars, but also a stronger dynamic in writing art history?
Yeah, no, absolutely a problem. The reason why there are so many books on Picasso is because there are studies and interpretations. It's not just writing the sort of the narrative of Picasso, where he was born and what he produced. It's not a chronicle. It is about interpretation. We don't have the luxury of that in the Arab world. When we did this MoMA, what we call the MoMA book, Modern Art in the Arab World, primary documents, which is part of an ideological, I mean, MoMA is very connected to the State Department. They were promoting abstract expressionism as the ideal style of freedom. So they understand their role. And they have this initiative of primary documents from around the world, where, thankfully, they funded it was a 7-year project. We translated about 126 to 27 texts from mostly Arabic, but to, some were French and some were Italian, that we identified as important primary documents, things that manifestos, things from newspapers, things that artists said themselves, because we wanted the voice of the artist to be heard. Translation, which is a whole bigger problem, was not an easy thing. As we were talking earlier, when you translate the text literally, then it makes no sense in English. And if you interpret it, then you lose that, الروحية, that spirit of the text itself. But of course, I want books that I can use when I teach. I need books that are accessible in English for my students. Ironically, we would like to have this book published in Arabic too. We haven't found the funding. MoMA funded the English, but we haven't found someone to fund the Arabic, even though MISC Art Institute was part of the funders of the English text. Now, what we were hoping through that and these other primary document books is to open the door for scholars, students, researchers to start writing the narratives of the art history. Most of the people who come to the region to do research are more interested in the contemporary. There's a lot happening, and the contemporary is very sexy. So of course everyone wants to write about the contemporary. It's happening. The artists are here. You can talk to them. Modernism is not a resolved issue. Who wants to, how do we think about, Radawi or Rizeza when we don't really know or understand exactly what was happening there? We need in-depth research for that. We need interpretation. We need methodologies. We need terminologies. We need to be able to think about the art and the art history of this region from, of the 20th century within its own context by not comparing it to Europe, by not using European methodologies. Now, of course, this is really easy to say. I'm struggling with this. My students struggle with that. How do we when we learned art history in English? That's why it's important to understand what art history means here. But it is from within. I'm trying to write a whole book on Iraqi art without any reference to Europe. We'll see. Good luck to me. Yes. Good luck to me. Yeah.
Good luck, yes. But I think one point, this was what you were speaking about, interpretation, about this book on modern art. That was a monumental effort also of researching the references, researching the history. Also, I don't know how many art historians worked on this project, but that was a monumental effort that we would love to see happening at the MoMA in Europe, but also we would love to see the same happening here. دكتور مها؟
أنا أتفق تماما. يعني احنا علينا إعادة كتابة تاريخ الفن وعدم ربطه بتطور ونمو الفنون في الغرب 100%. وما ما أعتقد إنه يكفي إن احنا نرجع للقرن العشرين. يفترض إن احنا نرجع أعمق بكثير. يعني تدوين وكتابة تاريخ الفنون في الجزيرة العربية من أضعف الكتابات على المستوى الإقليمي وليس العالمي فقط. احنا نحتاج ان احنا نرجع نشوف فنوننا من بداية ممارسة الإنسان على جدران الجبال من الألف العاشر قبل الميلاد، مرورا بالحضارات والممالك العربية اللي مرت على الجزيرة العربية، خصوصا في مرحلة قوافل التجارة اللي كان في احتكاك، وكانت الجزيرة العربية فعلا هي مهد الحضارات كما يقال. نحتاج انه نرجع نتتبع النمو وفق ثقافة العصر، وإن كانت ثقافة سمعية لا بصرية، لكن أيضا نوثقها وفق الثقافة السمعية التي عاشتها، وفق الترحال أو فكرة الترحال، ربطها بجمال فنون اللغة اللي كانت موجودة. وبعدين ما نعزل الفنون التقليدية عن مسار الفنون الحديثة. اليوم في إعادة رؤية للفنون التقليدية، وكلنا نعرف أنه كان في استشراق، وما زال للأسف بعض بقايا استشراق ثقافي. لا تزال ترى الممارسات التقليدية تقليدية وليست في مستوى هذه الفنون التي يمارسها الآخر. فإحنا إذا عدنا قراءتها وربطنا فنون التقليدية بثقافتنا ونمونا بنمو منطقي، أعتقد هنا تكون إعادة كتابة تاريخ الفن إعادة منطقية.
شكرا دكتور مها. I mean, it's very obvious that we need more voices, but also we need different mythology. But also art history, any history is very different. But what is interesting also is to know that by becoming more global, also connected to the other art histories, we have to dig a little bit more in our depth and specificity of our region. I think we've been talking for almost 40 minutes, so maybe it's time, if you have any questions, we'll be happy to take them.
Of course, Noura has a question.
No. Yes. Yeah. Okay. I'm really glad to see all of you here in Riyadh, my city. My brain is like, Dr. Shabout is not in Texas, in Riyadh. Anyway, I have some issues I need to raise as an academic. So I teach in King Saud University. First of all, we don't have time to research. We have a lot of courses that we teach that has a lot of things that we have to do afterwards and before, and in order to teach these classes. So when do you expect me to write? First of all, the second issue is that we were just talking about it with my professors in my undergrad, that they have really here, I observed that they have a really kind of a negative idea about what an academic is. They say, oh yeah, academic people just want knowledge, they want you to be... So they have a negative idea, like it's not the correct, that it's the correct idea that we're supposed to have here. Because as you said, academia has its own thing that observe, research, and like that goes along or in parallel with the art world.
And in connection, not just in parallel.
Yeah, of course.
When we write about the art, we have to be connected to the art.
they grow together.
Yes.
The third thing that, I don't know if it's a question or what, since I came back here, I feel that the art world here, me and other artist colleagues, found that it is a top-down kind of art scene here, and we kind of struggling to get in. And I don't know what you think about that. It's really difficult. There are some names that we see for years, and
yes,
I've talked
yes.
to a lot
yeah,
of
well, okay,
yeah.
so let me quickly say, of course, I can't really comment much about academia here in Saudi Arabia since I don't know, but I also do know that the majority of you who come to study in the US don't come to study art history, you come to study art education. And so you get the art history as sort of a byproduct. So I think that needs to change because you need to be sending students to study art history if we want to write these narratives. And so and definitely in academia, as everywhere, it's always busy, and research is an important component. So that's an internal sort of issue that maybe Dr. Maha can comment more on. But I just want to say something about the art and artist. I will say that there are two different worlds of art that are in every place in the world, right? There are those groups, particularly today. There is a group of artists, and it's a growing group list, that are thought of as global contemporary artists that engage with the global art, contemporary art scene and are understood that way. And then there is the local, right? Because you teach in your universities and you're teaching a different language than that global art history language. And that's where that discrepancy happens. There needs to be a conversation between the two. And this is from what I see as an outsider.
أنا ما أعتقد أن احنا يجب أن ننتظر المؤسسات التعليمية كي نعمل. لو كنا ننتظر المؤسسات التعليمية كان ما عندنا هذا الكم من الفنانين اللي كثير منهم ما عمرهم دخلوا مدرسة فنية. فمعناه المفروض واحد نبدأ بالتوثيق قبل ما حتى نفكر في كتابة تاريخ الفن، نبدأ بالتوثيق. أعتقد من المهم أن كثير من الفنانين اليوم والناس اللي يحيطون بالفنانين مو بالضرورة الفنان نفسه، أنه نبدأ بعملية التوثيق. وأعتقد في مؤسسات كثيرة الآن تعمل من هالناحية. ذكرتي دكتورة ندى مسك وغيرها شغالين على الكتابة. فالمؤسسات الثقافية المحلية اليوم خارج خلينا نقول نطاق التعليم جالسين يشتغلون على عمليات التوثيق والكتابة، ويمكن بكرة إن شاء الله المؤسسات التعليمية تغار وتتبعهم.
I hope
Thank
so.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to give the mic to Nadia Kaabi Linke, but before that, I just want to add something about with you also about the notion of academia and art history in the region. You were saying that people weren't considering academia and art history. It's true, because also we don't consider and give importance to art and culture in our society.
Or the humanities.
In general, yeah. It is evolving. I think it is evolving. I'll give you a personal example. When I wanted to study art history in Paris, right after having, to be freshman there, I stopped speaking to my father for 4 months because he didn't want. Because he said, no, how are you going to study art history? How are you going to make money? How are you going in a certain way to be a man? You know? And this is also something that reflects a little bit on the mentality of the region, the mentality and the consideration we give to art history, but it is also a fight to write your own history and define your identity. And I think there's an effort, and also by seeing more art, it is also a new dynamic that is created in our countries. Sorry, Nadia.
Please. Hi everyone, thank you very much. It was really exciting, your conversation that inspired now this question. And it's a personal question also that I ask myself, and I would like to share it with you. Maybe you can help me to understand better. So history of art and identity, as you say, usually need to name, to classify. But when you name and you classify, we all understand that in that sense you exclude or other possibilities. So when you say Arab art, you are containing it into a specific idea, or let's say a common imaginary. And then also, Nada, you said earlier that you are American and Iraqi and probably other things too. And once we say that you are Iraqi, we exclude all other possibilities. You know where I am from and what I'm talking about. Yeah. So the question is here, how can we understand, or because we have the need to classify in order that we can speak, because we speak of something, so it has to have some kind of frames. How can you speak about a person, for example, coming from the art world, from the Arab world, living in the Western world, and producing an art that is completely related to the place where this person is, so the European, Western, whatever. How can we classify this person first? And on the other side also, what if a Western person who lives for years now in some Arab country and is so close and is interested to the issues and problems happening in the place where he or she is living, so it means the Arab context, how can you classify or name, in this case, this person? Is it still an Arab artist, even if the origin is different? And in this case, this Arab artist who's living in Europe, but treating European questions, I would say always through the lens where you come from, of course. How do we classify the sense? Because we are used to speak about mustashriqeen, so the Orientalists. It's easier for us because it was the context of colonialism, a very painful period that we are still, I think, paying tribute to today, because even if you want to write our history, whatever our is always on the fundament of what the Orientalists wrote. So we are like, it's like a chain. It's very difficult to get out of because of that 19th century constraint. All of what we're building now is through that prism. So all of these problems and questions that are eating me, I would like to see what's your view.
Well, to start with, actually, we don't define. We shouldn't be defining. The moment it's modern art in the Arab world. It's not modern Arab art, right? So, I mean, there are two different things here. On the one hand, for you to be a contemporary artist, you engage with the contemporary age that you live in, or the topic that you want to engage with, whatever it is, even if it is something that is 13th century. You know, some of the work that is produced by artists who study at the Prince Academy, for example, I call it a co-presence, because they're engaging with, let's say, 13th century, right? But they're in a contemporary way. As a contemporary artist, if you're living in Berlin, you engage with issues that are local to Berlin. But of course, we also very well know that you can't be in a bubble. So even Berlin is connected because it has the refugees. It has, the politics are global. So as a contemporary artist, I don't think you should be limited to an identity. Identity is not a barrier. And your identity, I mean, when I say I'm partly Iraqi, my mother is Palestinian, my father is Iraqi, my husband is Egyptian. And I live in America, I was born in the UK. I am all of this at different times. I'm not a little bit of this or a little bit of that. I'm a full American when I'm practicing my American rights, and I can be a Saudi.
Definitely,
so,
I agree about that.
Exactly.
I'm speaking about how history of art speaks
now
about...
that's the contemporary world, right? Now we have this problematic is, on the one hand, while I want Ibrahim al-Salahi to be facing Picasso, I want Ibrahim al-Salahi's voice to be accepted as an equal form of knowledge by MoMA, by the Western academies. So we cannot completely erase identity, particularly when we're talking about modernism, because it's not a resolved issue. You contemporary artists have the luxury that modern artists did not have. So they are still sort of in ways connected to the notion of identity. We just need to unpack that notion of identity, because identity is a malleable thing. It is something that, you know, changes. Heritage is too. Yesterday in one of the panels, I heard the words asala uturath, okay, which were the words of the 20th century, and by the way, not just in the Arab world. American art wanted to know what American art is and assert its own identity. So, but that's a politics of the time that should not limit you as a contemporary artist.
It doesn't. I'm speaking about the naming. How does history of art name these kind of...
So naming is a tricky thing, right? And when we talk about Arab, it's a specific moment of time. Think of it as a historical thing. Now, Arab is an identity, but it was a vision. It was a vision in the 20th century that defined a period of art that is, you know, not the only vision, but it was a dominant vision. We have to think about them within the context of their being, of why they came about and what did they mean, and then how did that sort of, you know, fall apart.
So that means that today we can transcend somehow. Transcend this notion of Arab art.
Absolutely. We certainly can.
Thank you.
Yes.
دكتور مها.
أنا بس أبغى أعلق على نقطة قبل شوي لما دائما نعيد ونزيد في موضوع الفن الإسلامي. الفن الإسلامي اللي اضطرنا كلنا فيه مع أنه كثير مننا ما لنا علاقة فيه. يعني اليوم لما نيجي نتكلم عن الفن المغولي، المسجد في الفن المغولي أقرب للمعبد الهندوسي منا للمسجد في الأموية، الفن الأموي في الأندلس اللي أقرب للكنيسة منه لهذا. وإحنا في الجزيرة العربية تحديدا ما كان لنا علاقة بهذا المفهوم الفن الإسلامي، فكيف نتفاخر فيه اليوم كأنه إرث من إرثنا ونرجع نقول نبغى نبني عليه يعني تاريخنا الفني.
Maybe on the question of Nadia, I just want to add something. We spoke about Picasso, and it will be wonderful the day we will have panels and we won't mention Picasso anymore. But unfortunately today,
but you know, he's been declared a Muslim by Barry Flood. Picasso the Muslim, read the essay. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, he wasn't declared a Muslim, but his aesthetics, I mean, yes.
مبروك علينا. By the way,
but he did grow up in Malaga. I mean, you know, it makes sense for him to be Islamic.
But for instance, some scholars, when they study the work and the path of Picasso, they can define him as Spaniard, sometimes French. Sometimes you go to museum and you read born in Spain or lived in Paris, and they change. Because I think also categories and categorization is something, especially for contemporary art artists, that is moving a lot. Maybe, inshallah, in 1 century, there is an art historian who will say Nadia is Tunisian, someone else will say she's Ukrainian, someone will say she's Berlin-based artist, depending also on different periods of the work. And
but also it's a problem of art history, because art history loves to categorize, you know, the isms. It's simpler, easier, clean cut. And it's a problem when things don't fall within these categories. But that's the revision of art history. This is the challenge.
I think...
I just have a comment. No, don't worry, I took permission.
Okay, I was afraid.
I had to take permission and I want to...
And after that, we will take one last question, by the way, but we are short in time.
No, but I think everyone's super excited about this one, and thank you very much for your time. On this note of categorization, and I think Dr. Maha mentioned something, لما قلتي إن الأعمال الفنية السعودية اللي في المعرض هذا يعني كانت قوتها صامدة بنفسها, which I think is what we're seeing lately, إنه نزع اللقب ما صار مفروض علينا أو ما صار يتوجب إنه نقول والله هذا فنان سعودي عشان نلفت الأنظار على قوة العمل, or to actually have that enlisted or have that الشغف يجي عليه ولا الانترست يجي عليه لأنه في السعودية أو كلمة السعودية أو لقب إنه أو الجنسية موجودة. بس أحس إنه is it something because والله it's في الcontemporary or the leisure of the contemporary world لما قلتي دكتور إنه والله we have the leisure of the contemporary world اللي نحن عايشين فيه اليوم that they can stand alone as a rightful kind of artwork يحكي عن نفسه من ضمن فنانين عالميين، لأنه مستوى الفن نفسه خلاص أثبت نفسه. الأعمال الفنية الفنانين السعوديين وشهادتي فيهم كلهم مجروحة، إنه فعلا خلاص امتجاتهم بهذا المستوى، ما أحتاج أزيد عليه ذا اللقب عشان I highlight it. كيف ممكن our modern artists برضو يكون في، هل إحنا لسه محتاجين ندخل عشان سواء كانت في المؤسسات in the institutions that are building collections، والله I want to build Saudi art collection من the modern era. طب كيف ممكن نتخطى هذا الجاب عشان برضو المودرن ارتست يوصلوا لهذه المرحلة إنه أعمالهم بالنسبة لنا جميعا that are close to it know the strength of the works of our modern artists and our يعني يمكن أنا because I'm Saudi and I'm going to say it يمكن are my closeness to these modern Saudi artists أحس when will they have that rightfulness to say أو ما أحتاج اللقب إنه أقول هذا الفنان من رواد الفنانين السعوديين عشان عمله ياخذ this rightful يعني Sorry, yeah, because I jumped into
because you were doing Arabic and English.
Yeah, it's fine. In the answer, we will be translating the English.
Okay.
When I answer, I will translate.
I have 2 points. Sorry, أنا الحين لخبطت. عندي نقطتين وأن طول الجلسة وأنا أحاول إني ما ألخبط ولا أدخل أي كلمة إنجليزية. عندي نقطتين. النقطة الأولى أبغى أقول إنه برضو في ميزة إضافية. الأعمال الفنية السعودية لما كان الفنان السعودي يستقطب من مؤسسات أجنبية كان في جزء منها على الأقل كان في نوع من الأدلجة. هنا عندنا تقريبا ختم جودة إنه ما في أدلجة، لأنه ما في هدف إنه يتأدلج زي ما كان إذا هو كان يحتاج إنه يكون موجود في مكان ما. لكن أرجع للنقطة اللي سألتي عنها. أنا أعتقد أن مهمتنا اليوم أن احنا نكتب قصتنا. إذا احنا كتبنا قصتنا ما حد يقدر يتكلم عن النهاية بدون ما يمر على الرواية كاملة.
Exactly. And if you read the modern art in the Arab world and hear the voices of the modern artists, you'll know that actually they felt very comfortable in the international world. They did their work, spoke of the strength of their vision, and they did not. It's actually a contemporary thing that we look back and think that they were isolated. But that's a political situation because modernism is still seen as European, and postmodernism that came to fix modernism created a bigger problem. So we jumped into the contemporary global, and we ignored the past. But if you actually read, I mean, there were exhibitions of the artists, and they may have been ideological to start with, but abstract expressionism, Jackson Pollock was promoted ideologically by the United States as a modern artist that represents. This is the only American contribution to modernism is abstract expressionism. So ideology is okay if we know how to use it. There is always ideology in everything we do. And so, those exhibitions that happen, I mean, those are artists who exhibited in different places. Also, I mean, we know that there is art diplomacy, and there is that's what embassies do. That's what cultural attachés do, and it's okay because that's a way of introducing these works. But those artists in this book, they stood on their own. They did not need someone to explain the strength of their work. They spoke, the language with the rest of the artists in the world. Their stories are not written fully, so no one knows that. We don't. It's the problem. It's our problem, not their problem.
They also, how do you say that? They spoke local and international and universal
yes.
in a certain way.
And they didn't have a problem. They didn't think about it in that way. They did not really necessarily think, oh, I'm an Iraqi artist, I'm a modern Iraqi artist. No, I'm an artist first, and I'm engaged in international scene. Now, as all post-colonial artists, they were tasked with the responsibility of expressing a new identity. But, the Americans and the Europeans went through it as well. The British artists, the French artists, they all went through that. So it's not unique to us. We just like everyone else did, but we're stuck on it because the politics are not helping us. Because the world expects us still to express, how are you an Arab, look like an Arab, act like an Arab, That's the problem, and that's Orientalism.
That's the problem, yes. One last question.
Yes, سؤال الدكتورة مها، أستاذة مها عن إذنك. تكلمتي عن إنه نبغى ندون التاريخ الفن من غير ما نرتبط بفنون من بلدان أخرى، مع إنه نحن نعرف كويس إنه كانت هذه بلاد القوافل اللي حملت معها أشياء كثير، من توابل، من أقمشة، من فنون، من حرف، من حرفيين قعدوا في البلد راحوا ورجعوا شافوا في البلدان، وهذا الشيء استمر خلال تطور الدول العربية كلها أو الدول العربية كلها بشكل أو آخر. فمن فين يبدأ إذا كان البداية هي الميكس؟
إذا تسمح لي أختلف معك. أنا أعتقد أنه تحت تأثير الاستشراق الثقافي إحنا لما جينا نتكلم عن ثقافتنا صرنا دائما نربطه بالآخر المفهوم. حتى الآخر، أنا ما بتكلم عن الغرب، أنا أتكلم حتى عن المحيط. على سبيل المثال بعض الناس لما تتكلم عن مدائن صالح تقول مدائن صالح تشبه العمارة في مصر. لما تيجي تتكلم عن الحضارات الأولى في المنطقة الشرقية تقول تشبه حضارة بلاد الرافدين، على أنه حضارة العبيد وهي الحضارة الأولى اللي سبقت أساساً الحضارات التاريخية إذا صح لنا التعبير، بدأت في شرق الجزيرة العربية وبعدين انتقلت لبلاد الرافدين. دلمن على سبيل المثال، الكل يعتقد أن دلمن مرتبطة في البحرين فقط، لكن الجزء الأكبر من حضارة دلمن هي في المنطقة الشرقية من الجزيرة العربية. قراءتنا للفنون لأنها ما دونت بمنهجية تاريخ فنون صحيحة دائما نربطها بالآخر. حتى الفنون الحديثة في السعودية، يعني أنا للأسف أسمعها أحيانا من ناس يعني أكاديميين أو مثقفين يقولون والله الفنان الفلاني اللي كان موجود في السعودية في السبعينات ولا الثمانينيات كانت أعماله تكعيبية ولا كانت أعماله سريالية. ليه؟ احنا منا بتكعيبيين مش سرياليين، احنا لنا اساليبنا الفنيه المرتبطه بثقافتنا، والمفروض ان احنا نفصل انفسنا تماما عن النمو الغرب او المدارس الغربيه. ما يعني ان احنا ما نقول انه تاثر الفنان او اسلوبه يشابه، لكن ما نصمه بسمه الفن الغربي.
أو حتى هو مو تأثر وأسلوبه يشابه. يعني نورة درست في تكساس، زين، يعني هي تأثرت ولا أسلوبها يشابه؟ هي جت ومعاها الخلفية اللي جابتها معاها، وبعدين هناك تخلطت مع طلاب ثانيين تعلموا منها قد ما هي تعلمت منهم. يعني أنت أثرتي مثل ما تأثرتي. نفس الشيء في الفنانين كلهم اللي كانوا في يعني خلال التاريخ، اللي درس في بريطانيا ولا درس في إسبانيا ولا درس في فرنسا، يعني اللي عاشر بيكاسو، احنا مرتبطين بيكاسو، اللي عاشر بيكاسو أثر على بيكاسو as well.
شكرا دكتور. لا 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 لا
I spoke in Arabic, yes.
لا حلو بالعربي بس I'm sorry. I think I'm really sorry. We have to stop the questions here because it was the last question. I think we had panels with curators, organizers, artists, but you can see with the talks with scholars that there is a lot to do, a lot of passion. I think it's not a single effort from art historian or professors, but it's an important effort that is requested by all of us, consideration to arts, consideration by visitors, attendee, public, politics, institutions, and we have a lot to do. And I hope I don't know, in a few years, maybe we will be sitting and presenting collaborative work born in the Arab world, developed in the Arab world, in order to honor Arab creativity and thinking and defining more specifically what is it. I was about to say Tunisian, oh my goodness, about to define Arab art history and Arab art in general. Thank you very, very much, and thank you very much for the organizers and Dr. Nada.
Thank you.